It is a beautiful Monday afternoon, and thanks for joining us on the program Africa Discourse on Independent Television. My name is Evan Sunokoge. May 1st, Workers' Day, you call it, and of course the public holiday. So we say happy public holiday to all workers out there. So I want to start by telling myself happy Workers' Day, even if I'm on duty, but I must celebrate myself and also celebrate what it is to be a worker in Nigeria. Anyway, the issue with Sudan is still ongoing, crisis in Sudan, the civil war, you may want to call it, in Sudan. And we understand that the crisis has taken a different dimension after the ceasefire. The ceasefire elapsed about 2 days ago. And most nations of the world haven't succeeded in evacuating their nationals from Sudan, except one or two nations that the issues as it relates to evacuation of their nationals is still very controversial. Well, I don't want to mention names of nations now, but we understand that substantially these nations have been able to evacuate their nationals from Sudan, most especially from Khartoum, that's the capital city of Sudan now, to and other neighboring countries and neighboring cities so that they can find a kind of a safe haven. Anyway, one thing that goes with civil war is the humanitarian crisis that a lot of persons don't see or they don't even talk about. If you like, you can turn the narrative, turn it around, or if you like, you can call it the flip side of the crisis in Sudan. We understand that as we speak now, there's a huge amount of humanitarian crisis in Sudan. As a result of the crisis, the civil war in Sudan, we've been following the story, how the two army generals have been on each other's neck, and of course how the fight for the supremacy, for the soul of Sudan is on. And the effect of it is that a lot of persons are suffering untold hardship, talking about inadequate, healthcare, situations that they face, such as, like what happened a few days ago. We understand that a certain laboratory was attacked. Hospitals have been attacked day in, day out. And of course, we also understand that people on their sick beds are also being attacked. As a matter of fact, because of inadequate healthcare attention, these persons die in their thousands. Can we continue like this? Well, to discuss all these issues today, we have a public health physician, and of course, an international public health physician, you may want to say, Dr. Leonard Atsikide. Sir, welcome to the program African Discourse.
It's a pleasure. Before I continue, I would like to just correct you briefly on the introduction.
Okay.
Family physician. So public health physicians are actually different from family physician. So I am a family physician and very proud one, of course.
Yeah, but some of the issues we're going to be looking at today, they are public health issues. Yeah. So you can also...
Of course, we are well equipped to be able to address those issues. Yes.
All right. So just like what we talked about in what is going on in Sudan now, what are your concerns? Sudan is going through a whole lot, humanitarian crisis as it were.
You see, Sudan originally has been in crisis for really God knows for how long now. And it's one of the poorest countries we have around, even in Africa. And yet, because of a disagreement between two men,
yeah,
a lot of persons are being killed for what they know nothing about. And my main concern here is now, ideally, even in war, we are supposed to respect health facilities. But in this case, hospitals are attacked, laboratories are attacked, pharmacy shops, virtually everything. They are attacking anything that they can lay their hands on. And that goes to mean that there is going to be health crisis in that nation. Because when there is war, people are displaced, and as a result of that displacement, there will be movement towards safe havens, and such places become overcrowded, and there are a lot of issues that are accompanying overcrowding. And again, those who are injured, they cannot access care, people are hungry, no food, children cannot, be fed. Some of them, their parents will not run and leave them, so to fend for themselves. and many of them are going to die not even from the bullet, but from malnutrition and hunger. So it's a pitiable situation that we can still have this kind of situation in Africa at this very critical moment. So my view, my main concern here is for women and children, and for the innocent man who knows nothing about what actually is causing this crisis.
Okay. All right. So for the sake of emphasis on the show, this program, we have some form of video footage that we enable you to understand. That video footage is going to be ready so that we'll let you see, so that you can actually appreciate and have an appraisal on the situation in Sudan. Now, Dr. Leonard Atsikidi, the situation where we are now, well, I have never seen a war. During the last civil war in Nigeria, I wasn't there to witness it and all that. But we understand that there's what they call war crime. There are things that even warring factions do that are known as a war crime. Just like what you said a while ago, that hospitals are being attacked, laboratories are being attacked and all that. Now, what can we do in this situation? Are we going to say that people should not go to the hospitals? Pregnant women must give birth at this period in Sudan?
Well, in war situation, the safest thing to do is for you to run to safe havens. And most times, it has to mean that you have to cross the borders of those countries, just like it happened in Ukraine, where everybody, those that were living in those areas that were affected, they needed to run to safe havens. So, and I think in this wise, of course, the UN always come to the aid of such countries where there are crises. They try to create a safe zone, and in such zones, they provide all kind of ad hoc arrangements for Medicare and what have you. So, and in this particular situation, I think the UN is also doing the same thing. And another thing is for even those who are fighting to respect some of these arrangements. For example, during war, I know that women and children are supposed to be spared, but many a time they become victims too. So, and hospitals, churches, worship places are also supposed to be safe havens where people can run to and get safety. But what we experience in this part of the world, or maybe generally, is that those who are involved in this war, they don't even care. So, as far as I'm concerned, yes, of course, pregnant women must give birth. Some will deliver, and they won't get assistance, and they will die in the process, probably as a result of complications. So, I think if the UN can create a safe haven where people can easily run to and get some form of assistance. One of the major crises they are going to have right now is there is going to be shortages of food and pharmaceuticals. And the few that will be available, of course, to be the survival of the fittest. So I think, yes, the world needs to intervene urgently so that this fighting will come to an end.
Okay. All right. So the program is still Africa Discourse on independent television, and we are looking at the humanitarian crisis in Sudan as an effect of, what is going on in Sudan. All right. So this is what the story looks like in Sudan. This is a video footage that we had to prepare so that you can actually understand when we say that there is crisis in Sudan. Civil war, you may call it, as a result of two army generals that are fighting for the soul of Sudan. And it's so pathetic to know that innocent persons are already suffering it, persons that probably do not know, they don't have a share in what is going on in Sudan, but they're just suffering it, and hence we have what we're talking about today, resolving the humanitarian crisis in Sudan. And you know that in any war situation, just like what our doctor said here, that there's an health care, there's a health, aspect of it that people go through. Take, for example, the pregnant woman that is pregnant right now. that must go to, a hospital to give birth, or that individual, a Sudanese or even a foreign national that has one big ailment that must go to an hospital. You see that these persons, whether you like it or not, whether the war goes on or not, these persons must, go to health facilities and all that. All right, so back to you, Dr. Leonard Asikiri. I think this is one of the safe haven now that some victims had to run to for safety and all of that. Now, in this kind of situation too, Dr. Leonard Asikiri, you find unprecedented crowd in an environment, and if there's any infection, airborne disease and all that, it will just readily spread. Now, as a professional in this regard, are there ways you think, are there things you think that can be done now? Because it was the United Nations some few days ago that warned that because of the crisis in Sudan, that the world faces another, impending epidemic, you may want to say. People will leave Sudan. Take, for example, the Nigerians that left Sudan a few days ago, came back to the country and all that. They may be carrying one form of, disease and all that in this kind of situation. So what do you think can be done in this kind of situation?
Well, in a war situation, it's actually an abnormal situation. And in this, nobody is actually talking about comfort this time around. All they want is survival. And you can see the crowd there, apart from airborne diseases, even dermatological conditions can also be, spread among these refugees. And even common cough, upper respiratory diseases or lower respiratory diseases, tuberculosis, and what have you, can easily spread. More so that these people are hungry. They are not, of course, there's no way they can be properly fed because nobody prepared or planned for these. And as a result, the immunity will go down. Those who have comorbidities, of course, they are at the risk of dying. And, little or small ailments that normally will not kill, an individual. In this situation, the individual can die. For example, if you have upper respiratory tract infection or lower respiratory tract infection or pneumonia, or you are diabetic or you are asthmatic, in this kind of overcrowding, of course, if you have an attack, of course, the likelihood of losing that patient is very high. So, for me, the best that can be done is for those who are involved in mediation to ensure to do something fast to stop this unnecessary killing. Okay. In fact, when I look at the video, it's like somebody destroying himself.
Dr. Leonard. Now, what the viewers are watching here now, we have the two army generals. You have General Abdel Fattah on the left-hand side, who is supposedly the head of the military in Sudan. Then, of course, you have the rapid response, forces guy who is believed to be in second in command, the one that is fighting his boss, so to say. So he's perceived to be the vice president of Sudan, as it were, even if it's a military regime. And of course, he's the one fighting his boss, because of the conditions that is being given, that Sudan must be returned to civil rule within the next 2 years. And he's saying no, that it must be within the next 10 years. Those are some of the stories that we read from available literature as far as the crisis in Sudan is concerned. But most importantly is what we are talking about here today. We understand that the crisis is on. The flip side of the war, of the civil war, the crisis in Sudan, is that there is a humanitarian aspect of it, which some experts will say that is a humanitarian crisis. As the crisis is going on in Sudan, you talk about people dying of hunger, people dying of lack of good Medicare, and of course, people dying of the inability to access, medical centers and medical facilities. That on its own is a war.
Yes, even the injured.
Yeah, you understand? So that's what we are looking at today. So in that kind of situation, how can we resolve? Because whether we like it or not, even if the war has to go on in Sudan, at the end of the day, at the end of the war, we're still going to have some Sudanese or some other foreign nationals that will remain. So does it now mean that these persons that are not holding a rifle gun or holding a weapon to also be at war will just die of sickness and, you know, one thing or the other?
To me, I think in this situation right now, I'm not sure the war is affecting the entire country. And what those who are in charge of humanitarian aid are supposed to do is for them to locate safer areas where they can make ad hoc arrangement for medical care for those who need attention. And apart from the issue of medical, you also know that, like I said earlier on, there are going to be shortages of food and other, even water. The water there, of course, because of dead bodies here and there will be contamination. Because of
dust as a result of the explosions?
Explosions, dead bodies here and then, they are not properly evacuated or buried. So even the water is likely going to be contaminated. And of course, those who are supposed to be in charge of maybe water supply, right now, they will be running for safety. So it's better imagined. Because you need water to drink, you can't even get water to drink. And so I think the UN need to create or expand some of these camps where they harbor these displaced persons, so that, or they move as many as they can, they should be moved to neighboring countries where they can get some, at least better assistance and better care. Otherwise, the casualties that may arise from, if there's an epidemic, it will be higher than those who are dying by the bullet. Because if there's cholera outbreak in that overcrowded camp where they are currently, of course, you're going to lose many of them. So I think the United Nations and all other countries that are interested in seeing that this crisis is resolved should immediately come in and move as many as they can to neighboring countries or to safer areas in the same country where they can, you know, get assistance. And I think the world should actually come to the aid of the citizens, because, like I said earlier on, many of them will not have food to eat because they have left their homes. They may not even be taking of water to have their baths, but they will be looking for water maybe just to drink. And for days, they may remain just like that. So it's important that the world recognizes that there is the urgent need for them to move into Sudan and evacuate as many persons or citizens as they can to neighboring countries or to safer areas in the same country where they can get at least minimal, you know, protection and care.
Okay. Now, as far as we're concerned here, we understand that so far the United Nations has really not intervened, except the fact that we understand that some Western interests and also Russia. Russia is showing an interest in one direction, while the West is also showing interest in one direction. But let's look at in Nigeria here, we have the military doctors. Even in the military, you have some doctors and all that. Now, in a war situation, it is the responsibility of the military doctors to ensure that victims of the war are catered for and all that. So in this regard now, you want to say something?
Yes, but in crisis, military doctors will not be sufficient enough to be able to manage the number of casualties, the number of displaced persons. Because I know what a military hospital looked like, because I grew up in the barracks. So, and you know, military doctors are actually employed for them to look after soldiers who may need medical assistance or Medicare.
Not civilians.
Of course, there are civilians, because there are civilians who live within the military. They also take care of them. But again, they are not sufficient to be able to cater for situations of war, to cater both for military and for civilians. Because if you look at the population that we are talking about
they run into thousands and even millions. So how many military do they even have in the entire country? That will talk less of doctors among them. So I don't think the soldiers who are doctors and probably nurses, pharmacists, what have you, will be sufficient to handle the current crisis. Now, what they need to do, there may be some persons that are retired who are no longer active in service. I mean, medical personnel. They also need to mobilize them, at least to come and do whatever they can do to assist. And this time around, you are not even going to be talking about, oh, this one is a consultant, this one is that, or this one is... As long as you have medical knowledge, because most of the cases they will be seeing there are cases of trauma. Somebody, had a gunshot wound, is bleeding. We need somebody that will be able to bandage the leg or whatever and apply pressure to minimize or stop the bleeding. Before we now talk about, looking at that injury, whether the extent of the injury. So the first thing, give first aid. Do all those who can give first aid, even Red Cross members who are not medical personnel, but they have ideas of how you can manage, an acute injury. Of course, all of them will be mobilized to see whatever they can do to assist the people who need such assistance.
Okay. All right. So, Dr. Leonard, a while ago you talked about that you called on the United Nations to support humanitarian aids and all that. Now, the ceasefire has since elapsed. The greatest challenge in Sudan now is that the war has resumed. There are reports of sporadic bombings, sporadic shootings here and there. Now, should the humanitarian workers want to come in, don't you think it's going to be a precarious affair for them?
Yeah, even before this time, some aid workers have been killed. It happens, everywhere there is crisis. And for those who agree to do such job, full time it's a risk, and sometimes it's there are people who just believe that no matter what it costs them, they must do something to help another. So yes, they may not be able to go to areas where the fighting is raging, but what usually is done is to encourage people to move. By all means, move out of that area, move to this area where there's safety. And in such places, of course, they should provide security. And, if there's superior security, let me put it that way, I think they may not venture to go to those areas. But again, you can't trust these boys who are involved in this fighting. Just because theirs is to destroy the perceived enemy. It doesn't matter who is involved. And in the course of doing that, they destroy anything that is connected to them. So as far as I'm concerned, yes, they can come in, but they may not be able to get to the war front or where the war is raging. So all they do is to get as close as possible so that those who are fleeing, they can be quickly evacuated to safer zones where they can get attention.
Yeah, but people are already trapped in their homes and all that, so they need food, they need water. So if we don't have humanitarian aids, giving them food and water, how do they do that?
You see, like I said earlier on, the situation is an abnormal situation. We experienced those kind of things in Nigeria those days, though I wasn't there. So though that, as at that time, I was still a toddler, but the stories we were told, and in this kind of crisis, people will eat anything available
to survive.
Just to survive. People will eat anything available to them. So even, for example, those who rear pets at home, of course, some will slaughter them and eat just to survive. So that is the situation.
Okay. All right, viewers out there, the program is still Africa Discourse on independent television, where we look at raging issues on the continent of Africa. You will recall that for quite some days now, all the stories have been about Sudan, the ongoing crisis in Sudan. And today we are looking at it from another angle, the humanitarian aspect of the crisis. We'll take a short pause now, and when we return, we'll begin to make suggestions here how the crisis, the humanitarian crisis, can be resolved. Please stay tuned. You're welcome back. The program is still African Discourse on independent television, and we're looking at the crisis in Sudan, looking at the humanitarian aspect of the crisis, the humanitarian crisis, in the crisis in Sudan, you may want to say. And today we've got Dr. Leonard Atsekile. Now, Doctor, just as we were trying to say that already interests are building up. We understand that Russia is supporting the rapid response forces on one side, and of course some nations in the West are also supporting the Army General, the head of the military governments in Sudan. Now, supporting these people is not just enough. They are going to be providing food, water, and all that. So should they start providing all these things now? Don't you think they should also look at civilians that are not army? I mean, these people need to survive. Don't you think so?
Of course, because this is one thing these Western countries, they do to us in Africa especially. When there's a war, instead of mediating to bring it to an end, they begin to arm them and give them all sorts of support to encourage the fighting. I don't think that is good enough. The civilians are the ones who are actually suffering the after effect of all this fighting. Most of the people that are dying are actually civilians. They are not armed. They don't know what is happening. They go into houses, start killing everybody. You go into a hospital, they start killing everybody. So I think for other nations who are not involved in this fighting, they should, as a matter of urgency, see how they can reach out to the trapped civilians, especially citizens of Sudan, who are trapped within their own country. So should make effort to reach out to them and see how they can be evacuated from such war-torn zones to safe places where at least they can be taken proper care of. You see, for example, in this kind of situation, for those who need to take drugs on a daily basis for them to be healthy, now, of course, they can't even leave their house. As soon as their supplies are exhausted, they now begin to live on maybe, do I call it luck? Well, if I die, okay. So, but if this fighting is, comes to an end in a short while, such persons, of course, will breathe a sigh of relief. So for me, the civilians are the ones that should actually get attention from other nations, not these people who are involved in a senseless war. So as far as I know, as far as I'm concerned, the life of children, the life of women, the life of the elderly. There are some people who are very old, they can't walk the close of running. So those who are around there will run and leave them. Not minding whatever may happen, because you want to carry them. How are you going to carry them? So they will just abandon them and run away. So I think the most important thing that should be done is to see how this fight or this fighting can actually come to an end as soon as possible. Okay. Even the so-called the truce they had for a few days, ceasefire, there was never a complete ceasefire. You keep hearing of sporadic shootings
in some places. And there.
So, and it's an opportunity for them to begin to loot and destroy, things in that country. So I think the earlier they intervene into this issue, the better.
Okay. Now, what is your response to a kind of a perceived body language now of the World Health Organization, apart from the fact that the WHO had to give a warning some few days ago that with the crisis in Sudan, the world faces another impending, health issue, so to say. Some persons are of the opinion that it shouldn't just be enough to warn. The World Health Organization should move in so as to provide some of this, aids to victims. What's your response?
You see, well, for me, for those evacuees that are returning to different countries, as a way to prevent maybe any unnecessary pandemic or what have you, they should not just be allowed into those nations just like that. To me, they should be there should be a place where they can be quarantined for some time. And yes, otherwise, if there is any disease outbreak, of course, that is emanating from Sudan, and they just go into the populace, of course, there's going to be a massive spread.
Yeah, but don't you think that that also has, challenges?
Challenges in what sense? No, the truth of the matter, for example, during the Ebola thing, and I remember
the COVID-19 to another.
Even COVID-19. I remember that if you are going into another nation, especially those nations that were marked as, as risk areas, you were not allowed to just go into the population. Even some of those that were coming to Nigeria during the COVID-19, of course, there were places where they were kept for some days until the incubation period is over, and they didn't manifest anything. So I think the same thing should be done. Even evacuees that are Nigerians that are coming into the country, they should not just be allowed into the population just like that. They should be at least watched over for a few days or so, and in the course of doing this, not necessarily forgetting their human rights. So you watch over them for a few days, let them know it's for their good and for the good of the people they are coming to join. So I think we need to do this so that we don't face another pandemic.
Okay. All right. So if we can still roll the videos there now so that our viewers out there can see. All right. So this is the video, of the situation in Sudan. You're going to be seeing crowd of people gathering, in places of rescue and trying to see how they can be rescued in the crisis in Sudan. Now, Doctor, a while ago you talked about those that can and should be saved. You have the children, the elderly, and those that have, health issues and all that. As a professional in this regard, which, if we're going to take stages now, which do you think should come first? The children before the elderly, or the women before the elderly, or those that are perceived as pre-morbid conditions now?
Well, usually, of course, you talk about women and children first all the time. Talk about women and children because they are if you even look at Bible. But
we have those with pre-morbid conditions.
Yes.
Those are more at risk.
Yes, but in every war situation, in every situation like this, you have to talk about women and children because you separate for children from their mothers, for example. It's going to be disaster for those children. So oftentimes you talk about women and children. After you have, even if you get to the safe havens, they are still going to give more attention to women and children because, for example, breastfeeding mothers. Are you going to starve them? They need to be they need to be fed so that they can feed their own, breastfeed their children. So oftentimes you talk about women and children. Because even no matter how weak a man is, the man and the woman that have the same issue, oftentimes the man is still a bit stronger. So you will consider women.
Are you saying that from a professional point of view?
Yes, you must look at women and children first. If you go to hospitals, just go there, stand and watch. 90% of patients you see in the hospital are women and children. Men don't come to hospital. So if looking at that alone, you know that women, children, they need more attention as far as this war is concerned.
All right, so what about the elderly and those with pre-morbid conditions now?
Yes, elderly pre-morbid conditions. Of course, all you need to do for them, for those who are pre-morbid, when we say those who are hypertensive, diabetic,
have major ailments and all that, yeah.
Yes, those ailments are not actually, provided they are not having acute conditions. What I mean, the person is obviously sick and is down, is on admission. But somebody can be hypertensive and he will still carry the gun. Somebody can be diabetic and he still carrying the gun. So, but despite they are doing that, they still need to take their daily medication for them to continue to be healthy and be able to do whatever they are doing at that particular time. So if you even look at the war situation, if you watch the video clips, how many women have you seen carrying gun? Many of them are running for their dear life. But the people you mainly see are young men. You hardly see elderly persons among them who are carrying arms. The man, even if many of them that will probably carry arms, they want to find a way to escape. But for many of these fighters, they are young people. So you must make provision for women and children first before you consider others.
All right, so after this war in Sudan, Sudan as a nation is going to need some time for it to be recouped, for it to be resuscitated back to its stand as a nation. And when we talk about resuscitating it as a nation now, of course, we're talking about citizens of Sudan, Sudanese, and other people in Sudan. Now, for an average Sudanese that has lost his home, his shelter, and maybe lost clothes and all that, he's going to need support, some form of humanitarian support for he or she to survive. So, Doctor, what's your advice in this regard? Are you going to be advising the world to turn over to Sudan after this crisis? Because nobody knows when the crisis will end.
You see, let's look at Northeast, for example, where Boko Haram at the time virtually destroyed everything. Close to us here at Ohodwa, we have IDP. And if you go there, the people that are there have different age brackets. It's a similar thing that is happening in Sudan. Now, these people that are here, they are being educated, they are being fed, they are providing medical care for them. Similar thing. But when the situation returns to normalcy in the Northeast, for example, of course, many of them will want to go back. And while going back, of course, they are not going to go back the same way they came, because from here, they will, of course, they've gotten education, they've been cared for years, they'll be fed for years, and they're going back to their normal life. Whatever they were doing before, if they were farmers, they go back to farming. If the offices are open, those who were working there before will go back to their offices. So that is what happens in every war situation. So like in Sudan, unfortunately, they are destroying their own country. But by the time the issues are resolved, if it will ever be resolved, by the time the issues are resolved, those that are left will go back to their normal life. And as at that time, of course, you know, when they were running away, some people left some things that they may still meet in their homes. Because even if you are looting, you are not going to be able to loot a whole house. You can't carry chairs in times of war. You say you are running. Where are you then? That means you don't value your life. So as far as I'm concerned, what they are experiencing in Sudan right now is what has happened in part of Nigeria in the last couple of years. And it's not going to be different, you know, the same way that those issues were tackled in the Northeast. It's not going to be different from what is going to be done here. So that's the situation. Okay.
Now, a little bit of politics now. Rwanda is probably one country that analysts point a finger to. They had their own share of their crisis at a time, though it was genocide, not you know, the civil war that is going on in Sudan now. But at the end of the day, Rwandese came out, and they came out more refined to the extent that it is more or less like one nation that a lot of persons admire on the continent of Africa today. So are we looking at Sudan, that maybe after this crisis, Sudan will be a country that people admire after it all?
You see, one cannot really predict. But one thing I I want to advocate is that they should return this country to civilian rule. And if you return the country to democracy, people will choose who they want to govern them. And if you allow people to make their choices, even if it's an error, they will, of course, they will be able to cope more than when you force everything down their throat. So I believe that, for me, after this crisis, the UN should see to it that this country is returned back to a democratic government, instead of all these destructions that we are witnessing every now and then in Sudan. So I think democracy is what will decide the fate of this country, not these military people.
Okay. Now, what do you think is responsible when we see nations, in crisis in Africa? You hear analysts, just like what you are trying to say now, analysts call on United Nations and all that. Now, we have the African Union. Don't you think African Union should be called upon first before taking a swipe and calling the United Nations?
Well, African Union, they are also a part of the UN. And when we talk about capacity, UN has more capacity than African Union. So, and again, when this crisis is in Africa, sometimes you can find that some of the other nations within the African continent are culprits. They may be siding one side or the other. So, and as a result of that, their intervention may not come when it ought to come. So it is better for a neutral body to come in as soon as possible. I'm aware that Saudi has tried to mediate in this crisis, and some other nations have also tried, the US and probably Britain. They've tried to mediate in this crisis. But then, these people, they are trying also to protect their interests. And when people are doing things based on selfish interest or ulterior motive, it doesn't work well. So, for me, yes, African Union should have come in first. But again, it also depends on their perceived, how do I put it, the perceived relationship of these African leaders, in terms of the
Sudan.
crisis. Yes.
Yeah. All right. So, do you really see the United Nations as being, what's the word now, as being really maybe liberal, as being really not having interest in this, crisis in Sudan? Because when we say the United Nations, of course, obviously, you and I know that we are talking about the United States of America. Now, the analysis now is that we have nations already taking side. We have nations in the West. Of course, when we say nations in the West, we're talking about United States of America and, of course, the Britain. They're already taking side. Then you also have Russia also taking side. So if we have this situation now in Sudan, don't you think that the war may go deep end?
Well, I understand and I agree with you, but again, because of the relationship between Russia and the US as a result of the crisis in Ukraine or even beyond Ukraine.
Yeah.
So they are bound to support different sides of the conflict. But for me, I think the two people that are involved, the primary persons that are involved in this conflict, the leaders of the two factions or military factions, I think it is getting them to a discussion table. And once they agree, no matter whatever, and they should be made to realize that, look, you are destroying your own country. Even if you ask any of them to take over the leadership of the nation, they have a Herculean task at hand, because several parts of that country has been destroyed. So, despite that, yes, I agree that US and other nations that are trying to intervene, they have their interest. But then the onus lies on the two factional leaders to be able to sit down and reason that this is our own country. No matter whatever anybody is saying from the US or whatever, they will never come to live in Sudan. So as long as this is our home, we must allow peace to reign.
Okay. All right, so as we take our final parts of the discussion this morning, this afternoon, I beg your pardon. So, Doctor, what's the last word? The humanitarian crisis vis-a-vis the crisis in Sudan. What's the last take?
My last take on this discussion is that the United Nations should come in urgently and see what can be done to stop these unnecessary killings. And for those that are displaced, the world should come to their aid.
Okay. All right, so that's how we want to say a very big thank you for watching the program today. And just like what Dr. Asikide said, that Sudanese should know that it is their country that is being destroyed right now. We understand the interest in Sudan and, of course, the need for the nation to be returned back to popular rule, civil rule you may call it. But I think it should be done in such a way that at the end of the day, the Sudanese will not have regret. Now, that's one nation that is so blessed with natural resources. We have gold, we have some other, it's a nation that is rich in oil. I little wonder why they can't really reason all these things out so that they can have their interests protected. Well, I want to say a very big thank you to you, Dr. Leonard Asikide, for finding time to come on the show today. And that's the show. So until same time next week on the program African Discourse, my name is Evan Sunokoge. Goodbye and God bless you.